It's okay if you leave. I just wouldn't like pull your.
Yeah. All
We're trying
right.
not to injure.
I can manage that, I think. Good.
However, and
All right, and we have Lisa and Josh and David. We don't yet have Shahana, Alexa, or Chris.
yes,
Is that right?
Chris's ETA was
Right.
10:02.
No, all good.
Brad, how do you always
11.
have good weather? Do you do?
Yeah, no.
Rain or
Well,
110 degrees?
we make some deals.
You know, I called the Weather Channel. They really helped me out here.
Metro weather.
Oh yeah.
Good morning, make the road. Nice to see you guys.
Is Shahana going to talk about her bill?
Yes.
Okay, because I was planning to like shoot it, but if I'm going before her, am I going right before her?
You are
Okay.
going. No, you weren't. Oh yes, you were going right before her. I think it's okay if you mention the bill. Like,
Well, I was just going to say it was literally the last thing I was planning to say anyway, so it'll just be a good transition.
I'll stay in.
How we doing?
We're told to go up somewhere, inching up, and they are maybe losing sight. You know, every appearing.
Well, they were shutting down Third Avenue.
And another one today I just talked about. So they.
great. Yep. And then everyone, we're going to start in a few minutes. Thank you for your patience. Hey, how are you?
I mean, I think
Over the thing right now. Right. I have two
so. If they
Steve,
were
thank you so much for being here. I'm Chloe. I'm Coordinator's Press Secretary. Two little notes here. The podium, I hear rickety, just voted against it. We don't need to injure any journalists.
Yes. I talked to Brad a little bit about it, and I have an off the record combo coming up.
It was, but hey, Chris.
Hey, how you doing?
Great to see you. Thank you for being here. Got nice weather.
Yeah. I don't know what they had forecasted.
Chloe, we good to go? All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here. I'm New York City Controller Brad Lander. Excuse my voice, the allergies are getting me this morning. But I'm really pleased to be here with other elected officials, with shelter providers, with advocates, with union members, and with others to announce the findings of our investigation into the Adams administration's implementation of the 60-day rule, pushing families, asylum-seeking families, out of shelter after just 2 months. Many of you were right here. I guess we were across the street 5 months ago today on January 9th, when the very first families received their eviction notices and were pushed out of the Row Hotel. And many of us were here as well. And what we said together at that time was that the Adams administration must not, should not turn its back on 4 decades of a right to shelter policy that makes New York a place where we don't let families sleep on the street. Over 4 decades, the city had not turned its back on the right to shelter. And over 4 decades, it had also not turned its back on that statue in the harbor, which says you don't determine who gets to sleep with a roof over their head based on where they've come from or how long they've been here. So all that we knew on January 9th. But what we didn't know was what would the implementation of that policy look like. There was a promise of intensive case management. There was a promise of fair treatment. And so we on that day announced that we were launching an investigation into the implementation of the policy and that we would take a look over the first several months at how it was implemented. And that is what we are here to release the findings of today. So as of April 28th, the city has issued 60-day notices to 10,229 families with children, affecting 19,497 adults and 18,149 kids. Of those individuals, 51% have left shelter entirely, 40% have relocated to another shelter somewhere in the system, and 9% are in the shelter where the 60-day notice was given. And here's what our investigation found. The 60-day policy was implemented in a haphazard and arbitrary way, without adequate written guidelines in place, without training to the staff or contractors, without sufficient notices to families, and with arbitrary outcomes. So I'll give you one example. Many of you that were here on that day also met Maria Quero, who was 7.5 months pregnant as she was being evicted from the Row behind us. And a lot of us spoke with her and with her husband. She walked over to the Roosevelt, and I called Deputy Mayor William Isom, and I think some other folks did as well. And so Maria was able to stay at the Roosevelt. And I will say that the deputy mayor, when we have reached out about individual families in that kind of situation, has quite often been responsive about individual families. But what then happened later that day was that the Adams administration announced that they would exempt women in their last trimester of pregnancy or families with newborns from being evicted under the policy. But here's the truth. No written policy was ever promulgated. Staff and contractors did not get that information. The notice that you get when you get a 60-day notice doesn't tell you that if you're pregnant, you're exempt. The policy was not actually established. It was not written down. It was not promulgated. It wasn't given to the staff or contractors. And we found this on a number of areas as well. There is no clear policy on how you become that 9% who could stay where you are. What is reasonable accommodation? Who does get an exemption? Or on many other things as well, like mail forwarding or like belongings. The policy was implemented without meaningful clarity, even in the implementation. Similarly, on the 60-day notices, there's so much information that families don't receive when they get that notice. So there's no notice on what their rights are, no notice on how to seek a reasonable accommodation or how to seek an exemption from that policy. Another thing that's especially distressing is that when the mayor announced the policy, and repeatedly in correspondence with us, the administration referred to intensive case management, that during the 60 days that folks were in shelter, they would receive intensive case management to help them towards self-sufficiency and stable housing options. But our investigators found that there's very little case management of any sort. What there essentially are repeated screenings to insist that you must have somewhere else to go over and over and over again. There is not assistance in finding stable housing. There isn't real case management from social workers. There aren't the kinds of policies that help people actually move in the direction of self-sufficiency. And in fact, of course, repeated relocations damage people's ability to get their asylum applications filed, to get their work authorizations, to work with social service organizations and providers who are in those neighborhoods, who are in those shelters, and to get a job and to be able to move out of shelter and become stable on your own. So despite announcing that stable housing and self-sufficiency are goals of the policy, they are not, in fact. And one way you could know that for sure is our investigators asked, what is being tracked about the policy? The administration is not tracking essentially any outcomes. So we don't know whether people are landing in stable housing. We don't know whether they're employed. We don't know where they are in their application process for asylum or work authorization. And obviously, if there is no tracking of those outcomes, there is no seriousness about those goals. One particularly distressing finding that hasn't been revealed before regards the placement of families with elementary school age children. And I found this really stunning. So, as you know, the 60-day rule applies for families who are not in the DHS shelter system. You're in H&H system, NISM, the emergency system, the HERC system. So it's totally random whether a family gets placed in a DHS shelter and therefore is exempt from the 60-day rule, or whether they get placed in a HERC or one of the other shelters in the system and are subject to it. That's basically just sort of luck of the draw. When you show up, what bed is available that night. But it gets even worse, because for families with with kids, and I want to get this right, in kindergarten through 6th grade, for all the policies I mentioned before that are not in place, one policy that is in place is that if you apply for re-intake, if you've hit your 60-day rule, but you're a family with children in kindergarten through 6th grade, you will not be placed in a DHS shelter. If your kids are younger than that, which means not in elementary school, or your kids are older than that, not in elementary school, then if it's available, you're eligible for a DHS placement. But families with those elementary school age kids are specifically not placed in the DHS shelters where they might be able to establish some stability to keep their kids in school for a longer period of time. The administration offered no rationale whatsoever for that especially cruel and disruptive policy. And you can look in the report. I'll thank and name the investigators in a minute who did this really thorough work at all the ways in which, again, you know, we knew we didn't like the values behind the policy 5 months ago when we stood here. But even if you think the policy was appropriate, you would find that it was implemented in a way that was entirely haphazard, that didn't live up to its own goals and standards, that didn't provide written policies to staff or contractors, that didn't track the outcomes in any meaningful way. This is not a policy designed or implemented to help families achieve stable housing and self-sufficiency and integrate into our city. It was a policy designed to churn people through a system, to subject them to screening after screening, and to push them out of the shelter system with no regard for where they landed, with no regard for the impact on their kids' education, and with no regard for their actual path to stable housing, employment, and self-sufficiency. We make a lot of recommendations in the report. First and foremost, the city should end the 60-day rule. And I'll note today that that recommendation is joined by 1199, who's here with us. Thank you, 1199. By the New York State Nurses Association and by the Doctors Council. So our healthcare professionals are telling us that this policy endangers the health of New Yorkers and we should end it. There are policies that we could move to that work better, and I'll give you one great example, because just this week, our office gave prior approval to shift the contract upstate from DocGo, who has done none of the provision of good care, to the Jewish Family Services of Western New York. And what they are going to do with funding from New York City is provide the kind of intensive case management that actually every family needs. And in 9 to 12 months, those folks will get assistance with their applications, assistance with work authorization, workforce development, case management, and assistance moving into stable housing in 9 to 12 months for less money than we were providing to DocGo. That is the model, built on sort of the refugee resettlement system that we have long had for providing people, still temporary, no one wants to stay in shelter forever, a path to stability. We should end the 60-day rule and just move to the model that the city is already paying for in Buffalo. While the 60-day rule is in effect, we have just a set of really practical things. The notices need to provide adequate information for families about what the policies actually are. The staff and contractors need to get those policies in writing. We should repeal the exemption of families with kids in kindergarten through 6th grade. And we should provide the case management that was promised to people. One thing that I'll add that's not actually in the report, but that I thought of reading those stories about families being pushed out of the Wynn shelters this week. Wynn has 2 shelters that are right around the corner from my house, and the kids have been there, many of them, about 2 years, and really put down roots in what are 2 great shelters, and also a great elementary school, PS 124, that has been doing such a good job taking care of and integrating those kids. And now they are, in some cases, being pushed out. An emergency shelter nearby on 3rd Avenue is being closed. So on top of all of that, I guess just one thing that I would say just directly to the mayor, the end of the school year is 6 weeks away.
Yeah.
Suspend the 60-day policy for the rest of the school year. Let those kids stay in their public schools and conclude the year with their teachers and their classmates. I won't go into a lot else that's in the report and its findings and recommendations. I do want to thank the folks who did the work. So the auditors who conducted this investigation, the team was led by Marianne Mullaney, Executive Director for Special Audit Projects, and then Colbine Netland, Marina Stroffolino, Lily Lynn, and Jenny Brailovskaya. Please thank all of them. Our team has really been doing so much work on this issue under the director of the work of our Deputy Controller for Audit, Maura Hayes-Chafe. We had a great report on how much we're overspending on asylum seeker staffing contracts. We put the information on contracts out regularly, update the numbers monthly, and are trying to do everything we can to provide real transparency and oversight and point the way forward in a better way. And again, I think this, especially the fact that we rejected that DocGo contract and immediately launched an audit of it, is part of what pushed the city to end that contract and shift to the better model that Jewish Family Services of Western New York is doing there. Let's provide those services and that model right here in New York City. A lot of the people behind me and standing here are exactly the ones who are already doing that work on their own in mutual aid and grassroots ways. And if we can get the resources from the city, can be doing it that way as well. And we are going to hear from some of them now. First, we've got 2 amazing council members who have really been leading the fight on this issue. I think we have a rep from Gail Brewer's office. We might have a rep from the Speaker's office. The Speaker's been great on this, and there's a quote from her in the press release. And it is my pleasure to introduce the chair of the Immigration Committee, Councilmember Alexa Aviles, and also my successor and dear friend, Councilmember Shahan Hanif.
Good morning. I guess this is the right mic, right? Good morning, everyone. My name is Councilmember Alexa Aviles, and I'm the chair of the City Council's Committee on Immigration. The findings within the Comptroller's report should not be a surprise to anyone who's been paying attention, because the Adams administration designed the 30-60-day rule to be a bureaucratic nightmare. I liken this policy to the furniture that tries to make sure that people actually don't sleep on it, right? This policy was simply made to push people out, to disregard their humanity, to disregard their experience, but to make them so uncomfortable that they would self-select to move on, despite the real challenges that face them. This city should never, as a public servant, we do not step into this role to create bureaucratic nightmares and to dehumanize people. We are, as public servants, are here for the public good, to make sure that everyone is serviced with dignity and properly. So I find this policy just a true nightmare. And I want to thank, I'm sorry I did not do this from start, the Comptroller and your team for your incredible work on this. But it is true, it is not surprising because we knew what this would do from the beginning, as you all saw. As if asylees hadn't traveled far enough or been displaced enough by their circumstances, or by an incoherent immigration system, or simply by racist Southern governors. Eric Adams chose to do this policy. He chose to continue to enact the policy, seeing the harms that it was doing on a daily basis, because we in our districts have seen it, you all have seen it. So don't close your eyes. Believe what you see happening to be true. This is a cruel policy and it does not work. It is inefficient, counterproductive, and it is destabilizing the very families we are hoping to stabilize. So I just want to say lastly, the worst part about this whole process is that our newest neighbors know better than anyone else what they need to make it here. In mid-April, our committee held a 6-hour hearing on the experiences of Black immigrants, where stories crystallized a clear need for language access, for legal services, for work authorization, for culturally appropriate services like food and other basic needs. And simply how a policy like this also disparately impacted Black immigrants, where we were seeing notices being given to them in an outsized and harmful way. So we are here to say you cannot uproot, cut, or incarcerate your way into a coherent immigrant agenda. This 30-60 rule must end. And I am thankful for the report of the Comptroller, and we look forward to implementing these policies and to bring back humanization into our system, to bring back care and compassion into our system. We can do this. And thank everyone here for your support and all the work that you do on a daily basis. Despite the odds, we will continue to be the New York that we want to be and deserve. Thank you so much.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Councilmember Shahana Hanif. I first want to just applaud our Comptroller, Brad Lander, for the thorough investigation. Thank you to the auditing team for your hard work. And just like my colleague mentioned, it should be no surprise what this report details. We knew then let's be real, this is an eviction notice. It's not simply a cap, it's an eviction notice for adults and families with children. We knew from the start that this is a policy that is arbitrary. There's no justification, no sort of precedent set on how this 30 and 60-day rule was put together and why. So no justification, no communication with the council or other leaders to be collaborative and help us understand why families in our districts, why adults just getting their lives started here after trekking thousands of miles in the jungle from a traumatic homeland to a place that they want to restart a life with the opportunity for democracy. Nothing at all except for a doubling down by this administration that this is the right policy to address the influx of asylum seekers. And like our comptroller mentioned, at the hearing for my legislation, the Stop Shelter Evictions Act, Intro 210, which would remove the caps on 30 and 60-day rule. And I'm grateful to the 18 sponsors in the council. I'm grateful to the coalition, including Jews for Racial Economic Justice, New York Immigration Coalition, Malika, 1199, Women in Need. We are a growing coalition that says no family in our city should be evicted. Right now, We've got to be clear that this mayor has created a separate and unequal shelter system for asylum seekers. This is not okay. This is not okay. It's arbitrary, it's cruel. We've seen an uptick in street homelessness. People are living in unsafe quarters. 1,000 school children have had their education disrupted. This cannot be okay coming from the top leader of our city. So I'm thrilled that we are continuing to press on this issue. We remain principled in pushing forward and saying no shelter evictions. We must pass Intro 210 and implement the recommendations laid forth in this report. Thank you all so much.
Thanks very much, council members. I mentioned the 2 wind shelters around the corner from my house, and they were the first place where I went and saw the sort of model of what it would look like to try to actually help folks through the process. It was WIN that sort of first, before anybody else, was doing asylum application clinics for folks in their shelters, and in addition to really supporting the families. You will have seen the story in the city this week about the work they're doing to push back and not let families be displaced again. So many of them that have been in that school for 2 years, but also have been just forthright advocates for the rights of everybody who is homeless, regardless of where they come from. And it is my pleasure to introduce WIN Executive Director Chris Quinn.
Excuse me. Thank you. And let me first start by thanking Comptroller Lander and his staff. This is a very important report that documents everything we all know and everything we've seen on the front lines. And a report like this will make it so much easier to pass Intro 210, to pass the companion legislation on the state level. So we are better off today in this battle because of this report. Now, let me be just crystal clear. The 60-day rule is cruel. You're ripping children from a place they have called home, in some cases for 2 years. You're uprooting children who have gone through the trauma of having to flee their country of origin. Some children who have literally walked to America in search of a better life with their parents. Every other time in history, when we have seen an influx of immigrants to New York City, the city has done better. They have aided the city. This time should be no different. But the posture of the administration is what is different. They are trying to push these families out in the hopes that if you really treat people in a cruel and abusive way, they will disappear. But that isn't what happens. They end up on the street. They end up in illegal housing, putting themselves and their families at risk and in danger. Let me tell you, the families we've had, close to 1,300 people, the children are part of the fabric of their schools. The parents are in our work programs. They are in our legal clinics getting temporary protective status or asylum or U visas or whatever they qualify for. All the 30-day and 60-day rules do is harass people, waste city money, and play out a xenophobic policy that is so clearly targeting people of color who have come to this country in the search of a better life. It is not who New York is, and we will work at WIN. We will work with everyone in this coalition and beyond to get it to stop.
Thank you, Chris. Actually, one thing that Chris mentioned there is in the findings as well, in that, in the case management that is not intensive. One thing that the administration, that the current policy doesn't do is figure out whether families are eligible for a U visa or for some other status. So we're spending all of this time talking to them and pushing them out of the system, and in that process, no time screening for what pathway they might have to status and work authorization more promptly. And that is a good intro to Lisa Schwarzschild, the Director of Economic Justice and Family Empowerment at the New York Immigration Coalition, which has pushed so hard to make this a city at the forefront of providing services and protecting the rights of immigrants.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. And thank you to the Comptroller for this report. Thank you to the advocates for being here. We are always happy to stand with our advocates, our electeds, our fellow New Yorkers. But we are here yet again to tell our mayor an obvious truth, that constantly upending families' lives will never lead to stability and better outcomes for New Yorkers. And as the Comptroller's report shows, many of the problems that we warned the city would be the result of these 60 days have come to fruition. We have seen and continue to see children placed in shelters hours away from their schools, despite the city's promises that they would try to avoid this. We have seen families continually displaced, their lives disrupted by constant uncertainty. We have seen more than 1,000 students pushed out of their schools thanks to these policies. And we have seen parents choosing to live with their children in a field rather than continue to be shuffled from shelter to shelter throughout this city. Now, we can do so much better for our families and for New York. We know how to do this. We have to think and invest in long-term solutions. Things like housing vouchers, like affordable childcare, like the Promise New York City program, like real comprehensive case management. We need to definitely restrict the 60-day rule for the end of the school year so that our kids can finish the year and have what they need to keep going. And finally, we must permanently protect New York City's right to shelter for all New Yorkers, whether they came here 30 days ago or 30 years ago, and pass Intro 210, John Honey's bill, to codify that right to shelter for everyone, because that is what New Yorkers want, that is what we believe, and that is what we need to see on the ground. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And let's hear it.
The folks who have established that right to shelter, 40 years ago, and then defended it, constantly through, are, of course, the Legal Aid Society and the Coalition for the Homeless, and we appreciate so much, what you guys have done to build that law, to defend it, to protect it, and how much you have worked to show up for these families and all families. And so we'll hear now from Josh Goldfein, staff attorney of the Legal Aid Society, and then David Giffen, executive director from Coalition for the Homeless.
Thank you all. Thank you to the Comptroller's Office for this report. Thank you all for all the work that you are doing to protect people. We've heard today about why these policies are cruel, but I just want to highlight why they are counterproductive. We are asking people to do everything within their power to move out of shelter, and that's what they want. Nobody wants to live in these shelters, cramped in rooms where they can't cook for their family, they can't provide the care that they want. They want to be independent, they want to be on their own. And rather than assist people in doing that, rather than talk to them and ask them, what do you need, and provide them with the case management that would enable them to do that, on an arbitrary basis, we are pushing people out. And soon, on the single adult side, we'll be telling them your time is up. So if we would invest instead in the energy that people have and help them get the tools that they need, ask them, what do you need in order to get on your feet? What can we connect you with that will enable you to be self-sufficient, to support your family? That's all they want. And that would be a worthwhile investment. It would help people move out faster if we just spent a little money on that case management service that we've been promised that we haven't seen. And it would unleash all of this energy. I think there's no dispute that overall, new immigrants bring so much to our economy and energize our city and are the future of the city. And when we have a declining enrollment in our schools, when we have labor shortages, this is a time to be investing in helping people make our city better and not pushing them out. Thank you.
Thanks. Well, thank you, Brad. I'm Dave Giffen, Executive Director of the Coalition for the Homeless. And let's be clear about one thing here. The mayor has always been very clear about what his primary goal is here, and that is to reduce the number of new arrivals in shelter at any cost in any way that he can, to push people out regardless of the need. Now, reducing the need for shelter is something we all agree is a good idea. We do want people to move out of shelter, as Josh just explained. But to do so, we need to help people to resettle, to find permanent housing, and to find work. Unfortunately, neither the mayor nor the governor are pursuing those goals. We are not seeing comprehensive case management being offered in the shelter system. We are not seeing any real attempts to help people move into permanent housing. We still don't have a resettlement plan in place. Think about that. We have now been in this crisis for 2 years, and there is still no comprehensive resettlement plan in place. That is insanity, and that is irresponsible. What we've seen instead are attacks on the very right to shelter, a right that for the past 4 decades has served as a baseline of decency in New York City, a right that has given more than 1 million people away off the streets, and a right that the mayor has done his best to undermine and to dismantle. And in his ongoing efforts to deny safe and decent shelter to people who need it, he is continually implementing these arbitrary rules that further upend the lives of families who've already been through unbelievable hardship just to get here to New York City, who need more than anything just time to get their feet back under them, to recover, and some level of stability for themselves and for their kids. To deny them that is inhumane. And I don't think it represents who we are as a city. This is a city of immigrants. This is a sanctuary city. This is a right to shelter city. This is a city in which more than a third of the population are immigrants, and in which nearly half of the workforce are immigrants. So before the mayor starts putting up these obstructions that endanger the health and well-being of new arrivals and then make it harder for them to integrate into our community, maybe you should take a step back and look at the new arrivals and understand that it is maybe they who represent who we are as a city and who represent the future of New York City.
You're here.
And so we implore the mayor to heed the warnings in Comptroller Lander's report, to ensure that nobody who needs shelter is turned away, to ensure that we are providing people with comprehensive case management, with housing assistance, with legal assistance, with everything that they need to become new New Yorkers. That's really not a high bar. It's really not. This is something that has benefits, long-term benefits to our city, both morally and financially. So it's beyond comprehension that the mayor is doing what he is doing, that he is not providing stability to new arrival families. Thank you.
Thank you, David. We have one more speaker, and then we'll take questions. In the absence of that comprehensive resettlement plan, in the absence of the intensive case management that was promised, really remarkable grassroots effort has developed of New Yorkers in our churches and synagogues and mosques and grassroots organizations. A lot of those folks are here. My friend Ruth Messenger has been working with an amazing synagogue coalition. Make the Road, I know, has been doing a lot of that work themselves. Our friend Adam Abba has been doing remarkable work in Harlem. And one of the people that's been at the center of both doing that work and building the network of others doing it is Power Malu, and it is my delight to ask him to close us out.
My name is Power Malu, and our organization is Artists, Athletes, Activists. And since August of 2022, we've been welcoming the migrants that have been coming off of the first buses that arrived just a few blocks down at the Port Authority bus terminal. Since that time, we've emphasized to this administration the importance of proper case management to support the individuals and families coming to our great city so that they may become self-sufficient. But they wouldn't listen. They instead have squandered millions of dollars on multiple contracts given to for-profit agencies and created this fabricated chaos, AKA the migrant crisis. As a result, they have come up with this ridiculous, inhumane eviction policy and are blaming the migrants for their incompetency. It doesn't have to be this way. You cannot do proper case management in 60 days. We are proactive, coming up with solutions while they put up silos. We connect while they neglect. And we continue to welcome migrants now arriving at Penn Station, where just upstairs at MSG, the New York Knicks and New York Rangers are stepping up to the challenge and showing New York what teamwork is all about. This administration is doing the exact opposite. They really should practice teamwork and listen to organizations like ours and end this 60-day rule, and together we can turn this thing around. There is abundance, but this administration keeps promoting this idea of scarcity and trying to turn New York into a scared city. I'm here to remind New Yorkers that we are cut from a different cloth. So do not fall for the fear-mongering and anti-immigrant rhetoric. The eviction policy is a cop-out. Like the great Bob Marley said, don't let them fool ya. This rule is cruel. This rule is cruel. This rule is cruel. This rule is cruel. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Power, for closing us out so powerfully, and also just reminding us what it means to be New Yorkers. Yes, New Yorkers are showing up on the basketball floor and on the ice rink. I wore my Knicks colors today, but and New Yorkers are showing up to welcome the next generation of New Yorkers. That's what this city is, the greatest immigrant city that the world has ever seen. This policy is not only cruel, as Josh said, it's counterproductive. We have better models. Let's get going. All right, thank you very much for coming. Thank you, everybody. Make the Road New York Immigration Coalition, 1199 WIN, Legal Aid Society, Coalition for the Homeless, Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, Synagogue Coalition. And Chloe, are you going to manage questions?
Comptroller, so you have this report, these recommendations, but the administration they've repeated many times, oh, this policy is great for us, it's worked, it's really decompressed the shelter population. I guess, how do you get some of these recommendations implemented? And then also, I know this is not exactly your department, but does the council legislation to end the policies kind of conflict with the legal aid settlement that bakes in that 30 days for single adults?
Well, I'll let Josh answer that. But new law at either the city level or the state level would be new law. So if the city passes, that's why Councilmember Hanif was here. Intro 210 would end the 30 and 60-day rule. The legislation at the state level would do the same, and then whatever you want to answer the question.
Yeah. It doesn't make sense to push people out on arbitrary timelines. If we want to work with people and ask them what they need, then they'll give us the tools to move them out, and that would be a much more effective way to deal with this.
So I support the council members' legislation. I support the legislation in Albany. Look, I do hope the administration will still, take a look. The fact that they're not tracking any of the outcomes here, is a call to them to do so. A decision could be made to let families stay through the end of the year today. As I mentioned, on individual cases, when I have reached out to Deputy Mayor Williams Isom and said, "Here's a pregnant woman," or I don't know, one of the families we helped is a family that had been, it was from Afghanistan, I think 4 kids, 2 adults. And the place that gave them shelter when the Taliban came was Ukraine. So they moved to Ukraine. And then when Russia attacked Ukraine, they had to flee again. That wound up in Brazil. They walked here from Brazil, and we were about to evict them after 60 days in shelter. That's the 60-day policy. Now, in that case, the deputy mayor also help make sure the exemption got made, and there are some of the 9% of folks that are still in the shelter that they were in. All we're asking for is that kind of compassion made into policy.
Janicki, I had a question about one of the statistics you mentioned, that about half of the families who've gotten these notices left shelter entirely? I know part of the problem you're pointing out is that the city hasn't really kept track of where those families are ended up. But is there a sense from anyone who's here anecdotally, like what's happening?
I mean, yeah, I guess I'll first just say, like tracking that we have to do an anecdote. Like, obviously the city has the Asylum Seeker Application Help Center. It is trying to keep track of families. People have cell phones. You can stay in touch with people. You can follow up with them to see, did you submit your application? Have you gotten your notice? Are you eligible for work authorization? Are you in stable housing? So all of those things are pretty easily trackable. When somebody moves out of a WIN shelter in the DHS system, they follow up to make sure that the housing placement sticks. Like, that is normal policy when you do something like this, where you're saying our goal is self-sufficiency and stable housing, to follow up with people and see if you get it. And I just want to, your question is a reasonable one, in as much as they aren't doing that, what do we know? And I don't know whether folks here, I think we have this anecdote.
The speaker mentioned that they were living in the fields.
Floyd Bennett.
Floyd Bennett.
Well, look, we saw that horrible situation where folks were in the basement of that store. So, like, we know in at least some cases people are winding up in very dangerous circumstances. I think we know folks are working both, some folks who get work authorization are working on the books. Some folks who don't have work authorization are working off the books. And, I think there's reason to assume, finding the kind of housing situation that low-income New Yorkers are finding. But the truth is we don't know, and we should.
Yes, Andrew.
If you look at 1 year ago, you had about 4,000 new arrivals a week, and now you have about 1,300 new arrivals a week. And it's one reason that the Adams administration later is going to say, what is this guy talking about? New Yorkers no longer feel like this is the crisis that it was, and they think part of the reason for it is the 60-day rule. What do you say to that?
Well, first, as you point out, part of the reason for that is the reduction in the number. I mean, there's still meaningful numbers of folks coming, but fewer than were at the peak. We'll see what happens this summer. But right now what the crisis is kids are being displaced from their schools and families thrown out of the places that they're living. That's a crisis of City Hall's making. The broader global, refugee crisis is not. But the extension of trauma experienced by families who we're evicting, that's what we're doing right now. And again, I guess this week what I really want to point to is the fact that we know what's right. Like, we knew that, the DACA contract was wrong from the beginning. When they were finally forced to end it, here, Jewish Family Services of Western New York has built a coalition in Buffalo that does refugee resettlement, that for less money than we were spending on .go is providing the kind of refugee resettlement support that's all anybody up here is asking for. What we want, again, we want, of course, people to be able to move out of shelter and become self-sufficient. The way to help them do that is not to evict them after 60 days with no support and no follow-up.
Can I add something?
Of course.
We did a poll with the New York Immigration Coalition, and in that poll, over 80% of the New Yorkers who were polled said that we needed to be doing more for the homeless, that we weren't doing enough. So kind of the idea that the administration might put out that New Yorkers are happy that there is fewer people in need of service, our poll, which we're happy to provide to you, does not bear that out.
I wanted to Kayla.
Yeah.
Is there a sense or breakdown of how many of those are Floyd Bennett fields, how many of those are anecdotally elected or applicants getting involved?
It's a great question. I don't know. That number is just a number that they give us monthly. We've been in the process of trying to establish some confidentiality protocols to be able to look in more detail at what's happening in patterns with families, but so far we have not been able to secure that.
Is there any limit to the amount of time and money that the city can invest into migrants, hotel and shelter stays, immigration lawyers, employment services that you think would satisfy the city's moral and humane obligation to migrants?
Well, I'll point out again, I don't mean to be a broken record on this Jewish Family Services of Western New York model. It's actually somewhat similar to what Massachusetts is doing, which is one of the other places they have a right to shelter. But the model they're using at Jewish Family Services of Buffalo, their aim is to help families to stability in 9 months. So there's an extension to 12. And I assume there's some exceptions if at the end of that, they need a little more time. But yes, that's what Jewish Family Services in Western New York is contracting for. So for less money than we were paying .go, New York City is going to pay them. It's 500 plus families, and they are going to provide the services that they have found work to help people actually make the transition. And based on their experience, that's what they believe they'll be able to do. So of course, the goal is finite. The city doesn't want to spend the money to have people in shelter forever, and no family wants to be in shelter forever. The goal is in a reasonable period of time, and JFS is using 9 to 12 months to help people make that transition. I'm not trying to negotiate what should be in the new law or what should be in that's just kind of what's in their contract. But I think, again, everyone knows you can't do intensive case management in 60 days that helps people actually transition to independence.
Just want to add that it's a false narrative to think of this as a charitable endeavor. This is, it's not disputable. There's extensive evidence that shows that new immigrants add to the economy. They expand the economy, they generate revenue, they make the city wealthier. And so this is an investment in people who are going to power our economy and make us all better off going forward. It's not a sunk cost that we have to budget as we're only willing to give so much money to take care of people who are otherwise in need of help.
I totally agree with everything Josh just said. But if the city is really worried about money, there is an easy thing they can do. They can offer housing vouchers, FHEPS vouchers, to undocumented people, those who just came, and all undocumented people. We did a study at WIN. At one point, the administration said they thought the situation would cost about $12 billion. In that mathematical endeavor, we realized they could save $3 billion if they moved to housing vouchers, because a night in a permanent apartment is $72. A night in a hotel is like $380. A night in a tier 2 is about $180. So if they want to save money, they have a clear path. They're not doing it, so this really isn't about money at all.
That's right.
Woo!
Yeah.
Woo!
What does that mean for these people who are, lack of intensive case management could potentially mean that they have to work?
Yeah, I mean, we only looked here at the 60-day rule, so we were only looking at families with children. But my sense is that the situation is even more dire, if you only have 30 days, and we all saw those lines at St. Bridget's, folks waiting 4, 5, 6 days just to apply to get a new bed, or sleeping in chairs up at Bathgate with no reason to think that folks were getting any better case management than they're getting here.
We are expecting to soon be in a world where the city will be saying to people, you have 30 days, and then you need to prove to us that you've been doing everything you can to move out. And they have promised that people will, in that situation, have access to case management, and they will see the case manager 3 times for every 30 days. But at the end of that time, they're going to be looking at, what efforts did you make to move out of shelter? And if people haven't been provided with any assistance in doing that, if they don't have access to the tools that they need to move out, then it's absolutely not fair to say to them, we don't think you did enough. We have to help people do what they want to do, which is, again, to move out of shelter, to support their families, to live independently. And if we are able to do that, we will all benefit, including the people who are asking for the assistance, but all of us as a city.
Yeah. One direct question.
So Ruth has one. We could.
I just want to know if you could add to all of this the fact that there's a huge amount of private money, donors and foundations interested in figuring out how to work in the city. The city seems to only want that money for themselves, but if those groups were authorized by the city to fund all of the community groups, parent associations, houses of worship that are trying to help, we would bring new money into the system.
Yeah.
The right kind of case management, and we will, excuse my language, show up the city and go to that.
Here. I think this goes to what David was saying about having a more comprehensive resettlement plan, right? Of course, in that plan, you would be working with philanthropy and with all of the grassroots and nonprofit groups providing support.
Say that for me.
So the report gets. I understand that you're limited to anecdotes, particularly like on the kids who are having trouble accessing education because they're being moved around. But you were somebody who worked on the report. Talk a little bit more about the anecdotal methodology, how many students or how many families were reached, and how you had those discussions with schools.
Well, yeah, and Marianne, you can add to this if you want. I mean, I would say a couple things. What mainly this investigation looked at was policy implementation. We wanted to see, where are your training manuals, where are your policy documents, how are you implementing the policy? Because we wanted to put something out quickly. Obviously, it would take a lot longer to do something outcomes-based. It'll be very difficult to do anything outcomes-based since no outcomes are being tracked. But the majority of what the investigators did was really looked at the implementation process and materials in back and forth. Now, we did open up a portal and invite people to give us, to present issues to us. And in all of those cases, we did, if the family, if it was an individual family in a situation like that, in addition to taking the information for this report, pass along their appeal and try to help them be able to stay in shelter or get a new placement that was appropriate. And that generated some of the kinds of things we're talking about here. So we already knew about this question of pregnant women and families with newborns, but we got a couple more of those, and so we went back to the city and said, "Can you show us the policy?" I'll give another. There's this another example is that there were some holiday exemption days, but they only ran through the end of March. So there's just not even a written policy that says on the holidays that are coming up through the spring and summer, are those eviction exemption days or not? So, and the numbers that I cited are numbers the administration is just giving us month after month and that we put out in our monthly economic newsletter. Look, I do think it would be, tracking what is really happening with the kids in figuring out what schools they're actually in and matching that to policy eviction. And of course, following up with those families to see where they are would be really extremely valuable. But the administration needs to take the lead on that because they're the ones who have the information on those families and their contact information.
Okay. Everyone, thank you so much. That's it for today.
Thank you.